I get in trouble for the answer here.
Ooh, hang on. For full disclosure, Seb is sick. It's a fairly accurate reflection of building Tribe. You just keep pushing on.
This is the constant veil under which we exist all the time. You can build with anything but compliance that is very core. Cutting corners is a really bad idea, right? You're gonna end up probably hitting a brick wall, quite frankly.
Startup does not have to equal chaos or immaturity, and particularly the business that we're now building with Tribe, that's not even an option.
Yeah.
Right? We have to build a fully regulated, highly compliant, strong governance business.
Greatest challenge we deal with on a daily basis is to be okay with the fact that things may take a week longer or 2 weeks longer because it needs to be done right.
Yeah.
The challenge becomes in the external narrative. Commercial partners, investors, etc., advisors, they know what they're getting themselves involved in. Very few people will say, oh, I'm going to take the shortcut, but I left instead of right. It may financially damage my business. This happens all the time.
Being the founder of a startup is a very hard, very lonely, very unrewarding place. You got to be a very specific kind of person to be able to keep going, deal with all of the shit from every angle.
And it's a very frustrating experience at times as well, right? The tokens, so to say, that we're going to issue against this asset class, that is not actually the product. The core product is really trust.
Ultimately, we're building this, block by block in public. So game on to the competition.
Yes.
Bring it on. Catch us if you can. Welcome back to Block by Block, my commitment to building Tribe in public and the audio version of the Substack. So today I'm joined by Sebastian Agren, the COO and co-founder of Tribe. And one of the myths of building an early stage startup is that you must always do more, you must always move faster, you must always build more features into your product. And whilst I'm absolutely an advocate of moving fast and doing as much as possible, actually one of the biggest challenges that any startup has, and actually the true test of building a great startup, is the ability to say no, the ability to move slowly when slow movement is required, and not to, outrun yourself and run out of gas too soon. So I'm delighted to have Seb on today. Seb is obviously an instrumental player at Tribe. And he manages the engine room, if you will. He oversees everything from our regulatory licensing to our product evolution to our supply demand calculations and management, if you will. So he has his finger on the pulse, to say the least. So Seb, welcome to Block by Block.
Thank you very much. I certainly try to have my finger on the pulse. I'm not sure if I manage.
Keep trying
every day.
Keep trying.
And this is exciting enough, our first podcast together. So I'm really looking forward to today's conversation. And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head in the sense that it's a continuous iteration all the time of when is the right time to do X over Y, and the ability to say no is certainly core to longevity, both on a personal level, but also of Tribe as a venture's ability to actually be here in 5 years or 10 years, so we don't run out of gas physically as humans, as well as the company itself and the journey we're on.
I mean, that's kind of ironic because, for full disclosure, Seb is sick. So you're feeling it today. So firstly, thank you for digging deep and coming on regardless. And I think it's a fairly accurate reflection of, life recently, certainly building Tribe and venture building, in that you just keep pushing on, right or wrong. And there's an argument that you shouldn't keep pushing on, but yeah, I appreciate you coming in and doing this today despite the fact of you not feeling too great. And as you said, the mission that we're kind of serving right now with Tribe is building a mature business from day one. Just startup does not have to equal chaos or immaturity, and particularly the business that we're now building with Tribe, that's not even an option.
Yeah.
Right. We have to build a fully regulated, highly compliant, strong governance business, let alone, institutional grade technology, blah, 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 blah. So let's start with your role before we go into anything else. Obviously at Tribe, you're the COO. As I mentioned, you have your kind of your purview, if you will, is across the entire business. and your job is to both convert our ambitions, collective ambitions, into reality, but also to be the filter, right? Is that
Yeah.
fair? Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you define, if you were to explain your role, how would you kind of define your role, and specifically in the context of Tribe?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in the context of Tribe, the question is even more prudent because we are a regulated business, right? And I'm almost act as almost a constant feasibility check,
Yeah.
in the sense that you have to consistently ask the question, whatever it is that we're pursuing, whether it's product development or writing up policies according to the rule books for VARA, what pursuing new commercial opportunities, is what needs to be hold true for this to be a go versus a no-go, right? Because the trade-offs are obviously for all early stages massive, but for a regulated startup, certainly one that's so early stage as we are perhaps life and death, right?
Yeah.
So I would say trying to keep your finger on the pulse, in the sense that you need to know how all of the parts of the organization stitch together, and if you pull on a lever on this side, what actually happens on this side, right? It matters a lot. So that's the way I try to conduct myself day to day, is to be the balance between enablement and actually saying, this isn't going to work because of 1, 2, 3 or X, Y, Z.
Yep.
And it doesn't necessarily mean that you don't do it now, right? It maybe become a future project or whatever, because you don't have the time or the resources or the capacity, or the regulatory maturity to be able to pursue it. So yeah, that feasibility layer, and then constantly, I guess, holding ourselves accountable to whether it makes sense for us as a regulated business to do it or not.
And let's go back to the beginning then. So obviously we've known each other several years, worked together previously. When we first started talking about Tribe, what did you think was the problem that we were trying to solve? Or you know, what were you signing up to, I guess, collectively together, you know, to go and, you know, work towards solving? And that's part one. And part two of the question is, how has that changed?
The early conversations, and I think our sort of collective desire, was around this narrative of accessibility. I believe that was a major part of the, I guess, the underlying driver for why should Tribe, quite frankly, be allowed to exist, right? What problem does it solve, and what value does it bring to the world, to a degree that's rooted in how do you make the asset class that is real estate more accessible to the masses, right? I think a lot of the time the ecosystem that we exist in, and the conversation we have a lot, is they default to think that equates to, you know, the average normal person, what I guess we would call kind of retail type customers or retail investors, having access to real estate because the entry threshold is quite high. But the same logic actually also applies to, you know, qualified investors, or even to some degree, perhaps smaller institutions getting into the even less accessible layers of real estate, like you're talking about industrial real estate or commercial real estate. So that concept of accessibility, while it still holds true, and it actually sits, I would say, across the value chain or the spectrum of what is real estate as an asset class, for me, there definitely has been a fundamental shift, right? And it has been the real estate as an asset class, and the tokens, so to say, that we're going to issue against this asset class once we're operating live, knock on wood, soon. That is not actually the product, and what we are pursuing and building is really a version of regulated financial infrastructure, right? Only our financial instrument is virtual in nature, right? They're virtual assets as opposed to anything else. So, and you think about financial services as businesses, the core product is really trust, right? You're building a brand, you're building a compliance and an infrastructure that consumers or institutions or whomever you're serving, actually trust sufficiently to be able to deploy their hard-earned money into, right? And obviously with some sort of financial gain at the end of it. That's ultimately the goal of the product. So yeah, it has definitely shifted from this is the problem we're solving, we're building towards that accessibility, to what we're really doing here is creating financial services infrastructure to be able to unlock that use case, and also many others probably, as we have learned along the journey. There are so many opportunities and so many paths to go down, which is a whole other conversation, right?
Maybe that will be the next conversation. I think it is worth mentioning that a big part of the early conversation was rooted in, I guess, frustration around the lack of accessibility to real estate in a market that was just going up and up and up and up. And as the market was going up and up and up, accessibility was going down and down and down. And the gap between those that owned and those that didn't just became increasingly wider. And it is a problem. It is a problem we still are working very hard towards solving. But like you said, in solving for that problem, it's opened up a whole bunch of other opportunities for us to tackle, embrace, and potentially benefit from along the way.
Sure.
I guess let's look at like how we developed the discipline or the culture, I guess, of restraint, if you will, because it is hard, in a green field, in an area that there's very few licensed VASPs, there's been very few tokenized properties at a native land registry level. It would be easy to get overexcited and carried away, and I'm definitely the most guilty of that. So I'll throw that out there before I get called out on it. But what are some of the things that we consciously chose not to do? Because again, the whole conversation is how we're building this, block by block in public, and it's very easy to show off the things that we do, but it's quite easy actually to forget the things that we don't. And I think that would be worth kind of digging into a little bit. So is there anything that you can think of that comes to mind that we consciously chose not to do or not to build early on?
Well, yes, I would say, I mean, honestly, it happens almost like every week. There's an opportunity of some kind, whether that's in the form of a feature or in the form of a new hypothetical use case or problem that you could pursue, whether that's sort of, I guess, us as a company, as a leadership team that cook up that idea in a conversation, or in many cases, like external parties coming in and saying, I heard about tokenization. It sounds like the best thing since sliced bread. Can you tokenize this, right? And it happens all the time. But also geographical expansion, which I think is it's prudent to all startup companies. Like it's typically better to try and limit yourself to fewer single markets in the early days, but it adds a whole other level of complexity when you're dealing with a regulated business, because each jurisdiction, each country, in some instances within the same country, you have municipalities or emirates or states or whatever that have slightly different legal frameworks. So there are two things that we revisit all the time, and that I know have been in the conversation, in the mix since really some of the first conversations. One is the geographical expansion, right? We've had several interactions with other countries in various ways, and whilst we have decided to pursue one or two of those, there have been more in the mix, right? And I think it's very important to pursue them in kind of having at the top of the funnel quite a wide type approach to evaluate those opportunities. The trick really for me lies in, where do you have decision gates to protect your time and your resources? I think we're quite good at that as a team. If that's by virtue of how we structure the way we work, or the fact that this isn't our first rodeo, but that's the way you safeguard not going too far into a process by saying, for us to go to the next stage with whatever pursuit it is, again, product feature or market, whatever, what has to come true, right? We have to accomplish this, or we have to learn that, or whatever that might be. So, for our conversations and our sort of exploratory early days with Qatar as a market, for example, that was true, right? We did exactly that. We set up a plan. Here's what has to happen. If we don't hit whatever these milestones, it doesn't make sense to move to stage 2. That is a really big one. And I think that if you talk about product or features, one thing that continuously comes up is different asset classes, right? And building product or features, as well as obviously regulatory capabilities for different asset classes, was pretty much a hard no from the get-go. We decided we're going to stay in the real estate lane for now. Whether that's true 6 months from now or 12 months from now, well, it will follow a similar process, right? But that has been a conversation, and that has always concluded in, no, we're sticking to real estate despite gold mines, oil reserves, etc. That's coming at us from all directions.
Let's actually
right?
label the example. So mines, oil reserves, certain assets, whether it's kind of commodity based or art or you name it. There's private jets, I think, was one of the first ones. Still interested in that one.
Boats,
not gonna lie. Yachts, super mega yachts. I guess the Qatar example is a good one, where there was a good amount of healthy internal debate as to the relevancy of the market to us, based on the regulatory maturity in that market versus how we viewed the regulatory frameworks and maturity here. And I think it's fair to say there was some internal disagreement or
jousting.
And again, I think it's important to highlight that, because you have to allow for that differing of opinion or different perspectives, and you have to allow them to all come up, and those opinions or those views to kind of settle, as well as then make a decision as to go or not now, maybe later. And I think the Qatar one is a very good example where, we went from very excited to very skeptical to a little bit excited again to then very excited again, and we almost went full spectrum back and forward and back again. And to a point now where I think as a business we are very bullish on that market. We have some great support, great investors. The Digital Assets Lab looks like an incredible pathway for us. Maybe the Sandbox as well. We're heading over there to Web Summit also. So yeah, I think it's not every decision is black and white. Not every decision is yes or no immediately. Sometimes it takes a little bit of jousting and think, sitting on. And I think that's one of the strengths of character of the Tribe team, across the board, not just leadership team, but the whole team have that ability to surface their opinion, but also respect and listen to others to make a well-informed decision. How do you distinguish, or how do we distinguish at Tribe, between something that sounds good but not right now, and filtering and applying then, no, that's absolutely not for us?
I think the starting point for Tribe, and I believe the starting point honestly has to be the same for, this is purely from a business perspective now. I would say you have to know why you're doing what you're doing, right? Like if you don't have, so we have underlying foundational principles, values, etc. What have we set out to achieve here? Because it makes the never definition quite easy, right? Putting down your foot and saying this is a hard no becomes binary when you know that it's conflicting with what you set out to achieve, right? And I said that's quite easy for us. I have found it quite easy for us, even on an individual level at Tribe. A person within our team, whether they're an executive or founder or not, is quite irrelevant. Everyone knows why we're here, what we're here to do, because we have our mission and our vision and our values and the reason for our existence very well documented. Therefore, I believe that anyone who interacts with Tribe has the ability to vet those opportunities off the bat without even having a conversation about it, and knowing straight away if this is a hard no or not, right? The crux lies in the perhaps not now, but when and why, right? And that is I would say whilst you can follow perhaps a structured framework, for us it's a discussion, or we're extremely good at conversing. Everyone, like you're right to point out, everyone has a strong opinion, right? And I know we're good at creating a safe space, if you will, because it starts with that, right? Do you feel safe with having conflicting views? And can we hold space for those kind of conversations? And that's about relationships, right? We have good relationships within the organization. So that conversation or those discussions, while they may get very heated, and they do get very heated sometimes, they always take place, right? They take place really on a weekly basis, and they have to be outcome oriented, right? That's the goal here. Right? We're going into this with a common goal, and that is to solve something or learn something, right? And we are not against each other. We may joust or we may debate.
Yeah.
So conversation is the answer. That's the way we solve, perhaps not now, but when and why, and then digging into the details, what is required for this to be important or prioritize, whether that's a resource question or a timing, or is the market ready for it, or do we want to do it, right? Obviously this matters too. So yeah, that will be my thoughts around this.
Ultimately, we're building we're 6-7 months in as a startup, still very early stage as far as kind of startups are kind of classified, but we're building a business in a very well regulated space, is a better way of putting it. But you have to now look at trade-offs, if you will, in the sense of startups, as I mentioned earlier, typically have to move forward faster than bigger, more mature organizations in order to survive, to build momentum, whatever it is that they need to do. But on the other hand, in regulated environments, you have no choice but to do things properly.
Yeah.
So for us, are there any examples where you feel that not necessarily a compromise, but friction has been created from the need and desire to move fast, but the absolute necessity to do things properly? Would that be a VARA licensing thing, or a product thing, or a infosec thing? Is there any kind of examples you can think of in that respect?
Yeah.
How many?
I might get in trouble for the answer here. This is the constant veil under which we exist all the time, right? It's not I wouldn't say it's a single isolated pursuit or event or whatever. The reality is that if you want to build in a regulated space, whether it's virtual assets or something else, if you perhaps naively so, we had this idea prior to kicking this off too, that you can build with anything but compliance that is very core, you're wrong. That's it. You have to build with the regulator and understand the ecosystem that you're looking to operate within intimately, right? And if you do that, you will move fast by going slow, or however you put it, right? Cutting corners is a really bad idea in regulated businesses, because it's going to you're not going to get anywhere, right? You're going to end up probably hitting a brick wall, quite frankly. So I would say this is, for me anyway, a necessity, and the greatest challenge we deal with on a daily basis is to be okay with the fact that things may take a week longer or 2 weeks longer, because it needs to be done right. The challenge with it really is, in my view anyway, it's no longer internal, right? We know this now. We have been doing this for long enough, even though we haven't been doing it for long enough. There are many hours we've put in getting to where we are. The challenge becomes in the external narrative, right? I'm talking about commercial partners, investors, etc., advisors, and that perhaps aren't as close to the operational reality of building within a regulated environment, and making sure that they're on board, right? They understand the journey we're on, and that they know what they're getting themselves involved in. That is probably the greater challenge that we have ahead. So, and I also don't think it's going to disappear, right? Just because we go, operationally live and to market in the very near future, that's always going to be there, right? The regulators just shift from licensing to, working with us and supervising us, basically.
And then you mentioned shortcuts. If you look at other businesses or just startups in general, what do, in your view, other founders or aspiring founders maybe, what are the costs to those that take the shortcuts? Is it financial? Is it opportunity cost? Is it reputational? Is it something else?
It can probably be a bit of both reputation and financial. Those are probably the big ones. The way I would look at it is if you take a shortcut, if like what's the worst scenario in terms of the outcome, right? Everyone can think about the best case outcome because that's why you take the shortcut, right?
Yeah.
I'll get there faster or make
Yeah.
more money or whatever it is. But what's the worst case scenario here? And can you mitigate for that? And is it reversible or irreversible as a decision, right?
Yeah.
I think few founders that are savvy enough to understand the mechanics of their own business would take a decision that has the chance of at least knowingly financially like backlash on them, right? Because yes, we all set out, and most people anyway set out to like solve real world problems, right? And do something that's core to our beliefs or our mission, whatever you're on. But very few people will say, "Oh, I'm gonna take the shortcut," but if it goes left instead of right, it may financially damage my business. Brand and reputation, however, we've seen misfire on a number of occasions in a number of industries where it might not be, whilst the action is conscious, they don't understand how it's going to land with their customer base or something like that. I'm thinking about marketing campaigns and whatnot. So I would say, brand is probably the more likely and one that happens the most. Product and technology is a whole other conversation, right? Taking shortcuts and building features and coding, and again, if you're in a regulated environment, it's not a thing because we have penetration testing and stuff on our stack. So if we do that, the reports will show that, and the regulators will say, "Oh, go back to the drawing board and kind of start over." This happens all the time, right? People build bad product and crashes, and you lose your users and kind of get back to the 0-1 basically. But yeah, brand, I would say, is the biggest one.
Okay, so let's take a look inside Tribe. Let's call it the founding room or the founding circle.
Oh dear.
Yeah. Obviously,
reveal all of our secrets now.
Shout out to the other guys who'll come on as well. So obviously myself, yourself, Alistair, Hunter, Ahmed, our chairman, the founding tribe, if you will. We have some kind of early kind of executive joiners as well. Obviously Dennis, Benoit more recently on the product side, Jay, Anthony, etc. So, and more recently Cormac, who's joined the team as well. So we're a small but pretty mighty team.
Very mighty.
Not to mention Ivan on the design side and Abdullah behind the camera. JQ, Michelle, mustn't forget Michelle. So, but looking at the founding tribe, if you will, there's, particularly on the executive team, there's some really strong characters, really strong opinions, as you've mentioned.
I hadn't noticed.
And I have. And, when there is a disagreement or a conflicting of views, how has that led us forward? What actually happens? Like, talk us through that kind of process from the first intense spark to the smoke after the flames have gone out, if you will.
Yeah.
I think disclaimer, this is not a trick question. This is us being completely honest.
Yeah.
This is us, telling it how it is, and the guys that are not here being able to validate it. Because again, if anyone says that everyone always agrees with each other and everything's apples and roses, I think they're lying.
Yeah. I also think it would be a problem, right? And this is our second venture now. We're working together and instead of building in early to growth stages. And if you have a bunch of yes men and women in your organization, that's not a good thing, right? You want diversity of opinion. You want diversity of experience. It's about managing how those different opinions and so on are communicated, right? And the fact that they actually are communicated, right? And I think that's the starting point. Back to the kind of the early comment where if someone doesn't feel safe in sharing a view that they know might not land super well with the CEO or anyone else within the organization, that's a bad starting point. So the step number one is create an environment where people feel psychologically safe to actually have the conversation. We're good at that. I know we're good at that, right? Because we've done it, and we disagree and sometimes argue. Certainly disagree on a weekly basis, for sure. All of us in all directions. So how do we do it? What actually happens? Again, it's a conversation, right? Everyone has the right to share their point of view and have those opinions or input heard, right? And we're good at that. Kind of let's go around the room, if you will, and then it's a dialogue. How do you move forward? An element that we're quite good at, and we become a lot better at with training, because ultimately we have a number of people in a tribe now that work together in the past, is this kind of notion of who has the final say in a certain domain, right? If we talk about product and technology, Hunter, shout out to our CTO. Ultimately, we can have all of the opinions in the world. If we have dissenting views, then he is the person we trust, right? And the kind of core of that sentence is trust. That we trust him to make the right decisions to his best of his ability for tribe and for our customers and so on and so forth, right? And agreeing to disagree is very powerful. And me not having to, for example, taking myself as an example, me not having to get involved in every single decision because I know that he's going to figure it out. And if he doesn't, he can bring me back in. So dialogue is a necessity for resolving anything, quite frankly. I'm not sure if there's like a structured framework to approach this. Are we talking about human relationships here at the end of the day, right?
100%. I think one of the insights that we can share is from a leadership team perspective is we have weekly operational review meetings, but we also have weekly deep discussion meetings. Now they could be deep discussions on strategy, they could be deep discussions on tactics, they can also go off into tangents and be deep discussions around political sensitivities, right? But the core purpose of the discussion, or the very nature of the discussion, is it should be a deep one, right? And it should be detailed and it should be thorough, and hopefully it turns into a little bit of a conflicting of views or differing of opinions, and a few virtual jabs if need be. But like you say, it's a ring where it's anything goes, everyone's equal, no view is a bad view, with the exception actually of not having a view, right? If you unless you can't offer any value, right? There's no point in speaking for the sake of it. So
100%.
So from a framework perspective, I think we have done a good job of creating those regular platforms, if you will, for those deep discussions to happen, and then the to allow the sparks to naturally fly. And again, this is our way of kind of sharing how we do it and what we do. That might not work for every startup or large organization, but creating that space, I think, is super important.
100%. I mean, if I think about the actual real framework that we do have, is this time blocking, right? Segregation of what is this time that we've dedicated in our calendars actually for, and making sure that that time is used for that kind of dialogue, like you just rightly point out. But we have this other, I guess I'm gonna call it a little tool or feature of our communication that I think it was Hunter who brought into the mix, and this is this like concept of parking lot and something. And I think it's extremely valuable, and it's a respected thing that we pull out mid conversation to give our viewers a real time or a real example. Is it's effectively identifying that the conversation or the direction the conversation is going in is not conducive to what we're there to do or there to talk about. Whether it's in agreement or disagreement is kind of besides the point, but you can effectively parking lot a topic or parking lot conversation, and it's brilliant. And it's a card I probably pull out quite often. And so let's revisit that. We'll put it on the list and schedule time for it, basically. And I love it. So if it's
but importantly, it gets put on a list, right? It's not just a card that's waved around and then as a way of dismissing someone and moving on. Like you add it to the list, and we come to it at an appropriate time.
I feel uncomfortable talking about that, so let's just pop me.
So exactly. One example then that I can think of where, I guess, disagreement or uncertainty or differing of views ultimately, and it was ultimately because it took a little while, led to a better outcome, was around the book building, market making, pre-ordering structure of the product. So from a tribe tokenization of an asset or real estate asset perspective, we will have the functionality where we make the offer available to certain users or all users, pre-launch. So the pre-order phase, and ultimately it may fully fund before it even goes live. That was a big topic of internal debate, back and forth, up and down, round and round. But again, eventually we got to a point where we were able to move forward. The product now looks fantastic as a result. The operational flow makes a lot of sense. And from a commercial perspective, enables us to onboard users of different types or classifications with different access layers, if you will. And it has enabled us to build a bit, a different or an evolved business model pretty early on. We didn't get there quickly, I think is the point. And that's something really important that I think requires us to shine a light on, is that when you see a product, when you see a nice looking app and everything looks slick and whatnot, it's possibly assumed that, that was just a designer and, magic happened. The magic is actually in the ferocious debate.
Yeah, for sure. And it's a very frustrating experience at times as well, right? Because ultimately, we spoke about speed earlier. You want to move fast,
Yeah.
right? Ideally, you want to have it done yesterday.
Yeah.
But not at the expense of quality,
Yeah.
right? And finding that balance between, we got to get this done, and we have to do it in the right way, or to the standard that we want to, because we do hold ourselves to quite high standards.
Yeah.
And hopefully, and the goal obviously is ever increasing standards, right? But it can be really, really frustrating when you have to revisit the same debate more than once, just because you haven't managed to find common ground or found the right answer collectively. But yeah, we're pretty persistent like that.
We are indeed persistent. We are. Okay, so let's look forward a little bit. We're now going towards operational readiness. We had a meeting just today with Vara. So thank you, Dr. Aisha. We'll give you a little shout out today. Great meeting. And again, from day one, we've worked with the regulator. So, whether it's Paul or Yasser or Pratik, whoever it may be, we've had a great dialogue from day one, great relationship, and built that rhythm. We're now looking to go operationally live. We have a number of conditions we have to meet. Once we received our in-principle approval just over a month ago, we have 90 days, 60 now, to get all of those boxes ticked. So we're going from, I guess, operationally immature or early stage to operationally ready. And we have to mature quite quickly, right? Because it's not like we have time to figure these things out. No, we've had to figure everything out in advance. And then when we hit the go button or the play button, everything has to work. KYC, AML, compliance, reporting, blah, blah, blah. So what does, for Tribe, and again, for those that are listening, what does operational maturity look like for us going into, this next stage of our existence?
A large portion of that is operationalizing the policies and effectively the documentation that is because that's what it is, the documentation that is our license application and the license that we have been issued needs to actually be reflected in the real world, right?
Yeah.
It's one thing to write something on a piece of paper and say, hey, this looks great, but how do you actually implement that in the real world?
Yeah.
Whether that's in the form of a process that's owned by human, right? And you follow step 1, 2, 3, and you have a sort of a stage gate, something needs to be reviewed or a decision has to be made by a specific person in the organization of a specific rank, let's call it that.
Mm-hmm.
And to an even larger degree, systems, right? So building the product and integrating to all of the systems, such as like the KYC softwares and so on that we partner with, ultimately it's doing what we said on paper that we'll do in the real world, and it's not. I mean, it's not that we can do half of it and pretend like we do the other half.
Yeah.
Ultimately, we have gone through these operational readiness demos. We're subject to the auditors and so on and so forth. Like ultimately, everything we do in the day-to-day reality of the business also then gets documented and reviewed on paper, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of full circle in that sense. So this is really the full focus right now, as we have really built our entire modus operandi on paper, if you will, and how we want to run Tribe, and the regulators, thank you, Vara, have said this looks fantastic. Prove that you can do it, basically, and how you're going to do it. So, and that's
walk the talk.
Yeah, literally. And it's an even bigger lift, obviously, than writing the policy documentation and figuring out how to operate it. But this is where the fun part is. Like, this is what we set out to do, right? Actually running the company. So.
The theory becomes reality.
Yeah.
So we are now a VASP, with our in-principle approval, and soon, hopefully have operational approval, and we're a fully licensed, VARA regulated entity. For any founder or, aspiring kind of entrepreneur that's listening and thinking of getting into the virtual asset space, the regulated space, and starting from scratch like we did, and I think, it's fair to say we are the youngest VASP in that respect, in that, as far as I'm aware, almost every other VASP has come from either a parent company that has existed for quite some time, or is, a regional branch of an international, way more established entity than what we are. So, not only did we get to the IPA stage in, record time, or certainly one of the fastest to get there. What would you kind of advise, other founders who are looking to build into the space? What should they get really straight on, or really disciplined with from day one, to avoid them wasting their time, money, effort, and losing their sanity?
Yeah, that's a big one. You have the cliche sort of, I guess, stuff that people would consider as a first time entrepreneur generally, and I think all of those are true. If you've never built a venture before, if you've never started a company before, most people probably underestimate what it means to go through that process. I can't count on fingers and toes combined how many times I've had conversations with founders that, looking in the rearview mirror, have totally underestimated, and perhaps to the extent they say, I might not have done it if I knew what I was getting myself into.
Yeah.
If you're building a VASP, or probably any other regulated business, quite frankly, that's going to be exponentially more difficult, and therefore that it becomes an even more of a truism, I suppose. Knowing to the greatest possible extent what you're getting yourself into would be highly beneficial, because it's really difficult, right? It takes a lot of psychological resilience. It takes a fair amount of just cognitive capacity to work through, because it's a dense process to get through. The whole licensing application and understanding it. And most founders aren't going to be legal professionals, compliance professionals, lawyers background and so on and so forth. Some are, but not all are. So if I was going to start today, certainly if it was my first business and I wanted to build a regulated business, I would try to get time or exposure to one prior to getting to that. And this is something I've been advised myself in the past, trying to build other companies. So understand the industry, understand the business model. In this case, it's even more important, I would say. I don't mean that to be off-putting, just because the upfront requirements to start, whether that's like time, effort, financial requirements, and so on and so forth, are just much, much, much greater, right? You can start many businesses for today with certainly with AI and whatnot for hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars, or 10,000 dirham. The threshold is quite low, actually. That's not the case with the regulated business, right? You're most likely going to have to find external funding and these things from the get-go, right? Unless you're from a comes from a position where you can afford to do all that yourself, and perhaps if you don't make it, lose that money, right? So yeah, the cost and the risk from the get-go is so much higher that it's worthwhile putting in the time and the effort to really understanding what does it mean to build and operate this kind of company in this kind of ecosystem. And honestly, if someone came to me today and said, hey, this is the first time I'm building a business, certainly if they didn't have professional experience in the form of a career that's relevant, if they're younger, if this is their first company, I would most likely tell them, unless they're really, really passionate about what they want to do, specifically that, I would say perhaps start trying something different first to get the hang of what it means to build product, what it means to actually run a company, what it means to raise funds, hire people, yada, yada, yada. Because you have to take on all of that, plus all of the other stuff, right? And that's the tricky part. You can't just walk away from actually building and running the company as you're in a way running two at the same time. And on top of that, fundraising, which we all know, anyone who's ever done it knows that's the third job then, right? So it's a lot to take on at once.
No, definitely. So, ultimately anyone that is looking at building a startup, perhaps the best kind of entry point for them is to actually go and work in a startup and just see if it's for you. Right? Because I see actually an increasing amount of content now, particularly on LinkedIn. And, if you look at Instagram versus LinkedIn, Instagram makes everything look shiny and beautiful. LinkedIn is becoming actually quite increasingly negative, to be honest. But some of the raw, unfiltered content on LinkedIn is very true in that, particularly being the founder of a startup is a very hard, very lonely, very unrewarding place. You got to be a very specific kind of person to be able to keep going, deal with all of the shit from every angle, take all of the sacrifices first and probably for the longest. So I think if you are looking at building something yourself, just being in that environment to see if it's, if those kind of choppy waters are waters that you like is really helpful. And I think it would actually help a lot of people very quickly determine whether it is for them or not, without having to take all of the risk and all of the, well, not the risk as such, but I guess just it's a very important life decision.
It is.
Right?
No, I think you're right in saying it's
one that a lot
risk.
of people underestimate and therefore get wrong.
Yeah, it definitely is a risk, right? Whether you're taking, even if you're not the person taking the full, say, financial risk, because I think that's what most people would default to when you talk about risk around startups. But there are other risks and things like have a quote unquote normal Monday to Friday 9 to 5 kind of job, which in city I like to buy. Most people don't, because people work generally really hard here and aspire to greater things and so on and so forth, and therefore put in perhaps longer hours. But you're going to be walking away from a lot of things in your personal life that perhaps your peers around you are going to pursue, right? It could be everything from, social gatherings or family gatherings, or even having a family in the first place, or the ability to buy a house, to have a home, which is again core to Tribe's mission. There's so many indirect consequences, certainly in the early days of a startup, and it could be 1 year, but it could be 5 years as well, right? Or even longer if you're lucky or unlucky, however you want to look at it, right? It's only when you come out on the other end and the world sees, oh wow, that looks amazing, and look at what they've accomplished, and they forget that, but they've slugged it out for 6 years to get there, and now it looks very shiny and sexy and all these things. And entrepreneurship is very, there's a lot of glitter and glamour around it, but that's really a small part of the journey, quite frankly. Now you're reaping the rewards.
Tip of the iceberg, So looking ahead then, when Tribe succeeds, which it will, from a founding team perspective, look at the, whether it's the founders or, the core early team that we have in place today, which one principle, or you kind of alluded to values earlier, if you want to use value, that's fine. Which one will have been the most influential on getting us to that point of success?
Better get this one right.
No pressure.
For me, it would be that we don't believe that we have all the answers, and as a result, we're extremely open to learning, right? If you go into any company, but in this case Tribe, thinking that you know it all, you'll end up not learning nearly as much as you could have. Therefore, you're not going to be applying concepts like first principles thinking. You're not going to be open to the idea that whilst the North Star might still hold true from the beginning, the way you get there and the way you solve it may just not work, right? So, as a team, genuinely, we're extremely good at remaining open to being wrong, right? Or being proven wrong. So I would say that's probably the one.
Very good. Okay. And final question.
Wait, before we go forward,
Yeah.
what's yours?
Oh, hang on. Who's the
Put you on spot now.
who's the interview here? For me, it is speed. We from day one, when we decided to go, we decided to go. It wasn't okay. Like we said, shall we run? Yeah, we're going to run. No one asked which direction. No one asked, who am I running with? How fast I run? We just ran. And I think that's the nice thing about Tribe, is that everybody that has now joined us has just joined almost like a running pack, right? It was almost like a run club as opposed to as a business. Like, we're already running. If you want to join us, come and run with us.
Yeah.
And even, let's use Benoit as a great example. Even in the 3.5 weeks that he's been here, what we've achieved from a KYC compliance perspective, we have done or certainly you guys largely have done in days or weeks that have taken others months or years.
Yeah.
We got our in principle approval in 5 months. It's taken others, well, a lot of others don't get there. Some others take 12, 18 months. We've built a product in a few months. Again, some companies take years. And everything we've done with conviction and intent and speed, but not at the cost of quality, not at the cost of discipline or organization. Actually, we get commended on our discipline and organization more than anything.
Yeah.
But the fact that we can do that at speed is something I want us to continue and hold true for as long as we possibly can. As we get older, as we get bigger, yes, things may not be able to evolve quite so rapidly, but being in that environment is something very, very rewarding and very, for want of a better word, addictive, because we don't want to stop moving. And I think that's the common theme with everyone we speak to. Everything we do is, how can we do this to the absolute best of our ability, but do it fast? So yeah, speed would be my
We'll keep running.
principle.
We'll keep running.
Keep running. Yeah, we should have done this running. That'll be the next one. So unless you've got any more questions for me, the final question I have for you is, we're ultimately building Tribe in public. That's why we're here. That's why I write. That's why we post. And again, shout out to Alistair and Cormac. They've created a very good dynamic in under a month, realistically. Again, speed. Again, quality. And that engine, that marketing engine is starting to hum. But again, as a founding principle, one of those is openness, right? And just doing this in public, not being afraid to share our frustrations and where we've got things wrong, but also celebrating our wins. And so give me your prediction for what lies ahead for Tribe. What does the road ahead look like? And can you give me some of the major obstacles? Let's start on the obstacles side, and some of the major opportunities.
Yeah. What's a biggie? Major obstacles. Core focus right now is to go operation live. Like we said earlier, there are two major obstacles there. One is we need to obtain the, they call no objection certificate from the central bank of the UAE to be able to actually accept funds from our future investors. And sequential in nature, the next steps become to actually bring the business operationally live, because if we can't accept investments, we can't actually run the business. So it's pretty core to try.
Yeah.
That is definitely the kind of the core obstacle number one, is to obtain that and then go live. Obstacle number two is one thing to go to market and while it's an opportunity, and the main opportunity that lies ahead commercially is to tokenize a couple of our first assets and bring our first investors onto the platform and so on and so forth. It is to start building and executing on scalable systems, right? To bring us to another level that will probably take most of 2026 to go from 1 to 2, 2 to 4, and so on and so forth. And that does take quite a lot of effort and time to be able to do that. And if we look towards, let's call it like non-Dubai based opportunities, some of these processes that we have gone through in the past few months will have to be repeated again to some degree. I'm talking about licensing processes, setup processes. Qatar might be one of them. Other Emirates might be one. Other opportunities, right? So deciding which ones make sense and then overcoming those to be able to then go to market operationalizing there is certainly another major one for the months ahead and into the summer probably. And the opportunity is unfathomably large, right? Like wherever we look, there is appetite for this. And this, I mean, tokenization of real estate, but also other assets, right? So whilst actually, and in there lies the challenge of saying no also, right? Focus and whatnot. So that's going to be all the time. Finding the strength, I suppose, to say, oh, this looks really interested, but we're going to go down this way. And the opportunities is setting out to actually do what we said we would do, right? Proving that this can be done. Like you alluded to it early in the conversation, there's only 10 properties so far that have been done in the native sort of title deed level tokenization so far, but there are other models too, right? And ultimately, I think as an ecosystem, Tribe is a player of an ecosystem that is, tokenization of real world assets. It's a very hot topic around the world right now, but it's still quite small, right? Relative to traditional financial markets and whatnot. And proving that, our ecosystem and Tribe as a player deserves a seat at the big boys table. That's the opportunity ahead, right? And actually unlocking all of these incredible use cases that come with bringing assets on the blockchain and so on and so forth, which again, another conversation for another day, perhaps. So yeah, that's.
So ultimately, getting Tribe known at an institutional level is really the big opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. For the, again, big boys to get involved, they need certainty, obviously, right? And they have that now. There's regulatory certainty in the market. We will be able to prove by executing using our technology, executing using our licenses and so on and so forth, that whilst we're a young company in age, in actual fact, we've built very mature infrastructure, mature operating processes and so on and so forth. And really, jointly, because it's no single entity can go out and solve these things themselves. We're talking about infrastructure level kind of missions here. Unlocking liquidity is a major part of the issue of tokenization of real world assets, and has been, I think, core to a lot of predecessors to Tribe, whether it's in real estate or not having been able to go all the way, not having been able to crack this new asset class at scale. Is because they haven't been able to bring in the demand side very much, right? I think that opportunity is there now. We can see it. Is figuring out how that, I guess the bridges that we need to build actually function in the real world. So that once we do that, and hopefully, and I want us to obviously be the one. But I also acknowledge that there's going to be many others, because we need many others. Like we can't do this alone. A single private entity in one city, in one country in the world isn't going to create or form a new industry and a new asset class. Like we need to do this collectively, and there are many players that have a role in this kind of journey ahead. But you're certainly bringing in mature, not necessarily only institutional, but like bigger players into the mix. That's when the magic starts happening.
So game on to the competition is what you're saying.
Yes.
Bring it on is what you're saying, which
Come
I like.
with us.
Yeah, come chat with us, but catch us if you can. Seb, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming on. I have the benefit of speaking to you every day, and in most cases multiple times a day. You are the absolute engine at Tribe, and your superpower really is to be able to dive in at any level of detail across all areas of the business at a moment's notice. And it's nice for me to be able to talk to you like this and share this conversation in this format. So thank you, and look forward to seeing how many of your predictions come true.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure.
Thank you.